Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Today on the Eye of Power podcast, we're going to talk about some current events. Whether or not you are a NFL fan and understand and was excited about what was happening over the past weekend with the draft or not, there's are some lessons to be learned that I think are pertinent to our individual power, what we can control, what we can't control, what might have been happening there in terms of lessons that we can take organizationally. And it's a pretty dramatic example of how people can sort of behave and maybe do things that help themselves or hurt themselves. So with that, we'll dive on in to this week's Eye of Power podcast. Well, what am I talking about? Why would I talk about the NFL draft on the Eye of Power podcast? If you're familiar, you know what I'm going to say. If you're not, I'm going to be talking about what happened specifically to one player, and that is Shedeur Sanders, who is the son of Deion Sanders. And again, if you're not familiar with the NFL, Deion Sanders was a storied player for the Dallas Cowboys and the 49ers, I believe, and one of the most gifted athletes of all time in any sport. And he's had an interesting career coaching the University of Colorado. And his son was a quarterback at the University of Colorado and was going into this draft season considered one of the top quarterback prospects. And for most of the offseason leading up to the draft, most pundits that I analyze these sorts of things were thinking that it was Cam Ward was the number one prospect at quarterback coming into this year, and that it was pretty certain that he was going to go to the Tennessee Titans at the number one pick, which is exactly what happened. Then there was speculation as to what would happen with the number two pick and the quarterback class in general after that. Shedeur Sanders was largely considered the next best candidate by those that were talking about it. Now, who was talking about it versus who wasn't talking about it? Who was not talking about it were the general managers of the NFL teams and their staffs who do not want to tip their hand as to what they really think. And so everything basically is speculation. Of course, there's leaks and some inside information that comes out, but we never really know what that is. But just looking at the tape and analyzing the skills of the player, it was pretty clear that Shedeur Sanders was a pretty good quarterback and was worthy of being selected in the first round of the draft. Had any team done that, nobody really would have criticized them too harshly. But it didn't happen that way. And it didn't happen that he went the second day of the draft in rounds 2 or 3 either. No, it wasn't until the 5th round, pick number 144, that the team that was speculated at first, or at least for a while, to pick him at the number 2 selection overall, the Cleveland Browns, actually took him after picking in round 3 another quarterback, Dillon Gabriel, who they'd passed Shedeur Sanders to take. So in this draft class for the Cleveland Browns, they took 2 quarterbacks to add to a quarterback room that already had Deshaun Watson, who is a very high-profile player. Again, if you're familiar, you know what I'm talking about is a $250 million guaranteed contract that has been really a disaster for the Cleveland Browns because he's been hurt and he's going to miss this entire year. And even when he wasn't hurt, he didn't produce anywhere near the level that he had in Houston and that Cleveland had been banking on. So there's a whole mess at the quarterback position there that they were stuck with. To bolster that room, they also got Joe Flacco, who was 40 years old, and while having been a very good quarterback over his career, is nowhere near that level now, and who would be seen as a placeholder, somebody who makes sure that you don't at least have no chance to win. And then they also have Kenny Pickett. He was with the Pittsburgh Steelers and is really not seen as a premier quarterback property. He may continue to develop since he's young, but no one was really looking to him as an answer, neither were the Cleveland Browns because they took 2 quarterbacks in this draft. So there's 5 quarterbacks on the roster, and it's a little bit of a mess right now. But that's from the Cleveland Browns perspective. But the chatter of the entire draft became, what's wrong with Shedeur? Why is Shedeur dropping so much? And what's really going on there? And while that does tend to happen in literally every draft, where talent that people think is going to go high or talent they think is going to go low ends up being a different story in reality, this is one of the more dramatic examples in all of history. And so there's lots of speculation as to what that meant, why it happened that way. Depending on who you ask, they have different ideas as to the answers to those questions, including even President Trump, who tweeted in on the topic, thinking that it was crazy and something wrong with the fact that he dropped so far. Stephen A. Smith thought it was pretty much a travesty of justice that he dropped so far, and many others did as well. Many on the scene also say, well, it was because of factors other than Shedeur's playing ability on the field. And there's probably truth there. If it was just the tape, just the quarterback, what can he do on the field? That might have had a different output. But of course, in a team sport, it is never just what somebody does on the field, because teams are dynamic organizations that can be bolstered with the right kind of mentality and destroyed by the wrong kind of mentality. This is true in all organizations. When you have people that are about just themselves, that are really looking at their own aggrandizement over those of others, that's a poisonous factor. When you have people that are more on the idea of serving the mission, helping in whatever way they can, that tends to be something that buoys and builds up organizational culture. So no position is more high profile and more important in this dynamic than the quarterback position. For that reason, character and other factors weigh in strongly at the quarterback position. So the anticipation of what Shedeur might be like off the field is a factor no matter how you're analyzing the situation. And what might that be? Well, in this case, we have somebody, again, very talented, very storied career, really by any standard in college, but also comes from a line where his father was, prime time. So he really kind of defined in a lot of ways what modern athletes look like. And a lot of that style was the flashy, look at me kind of approach. And when you can deliver the goods, people tolerate that and might even perhaps celebrate it. But when you don't have the delivery in terms of wins on the field and elevating people around you, that gets old real fast. And so I think there's a feeling amongst GMs and scoutings that are paid and rewarded by how well they make these decisions that was a risk. And the reason we say that is because of what both Dion and Shedeur had said in the months and weeks leading up to the draft, where up until just a few weeks before the draft, Dion was on various platforms saying, yeah, we're not going to just play for anybody. We're in a position to sort of choose who we're going to play for, just like Eli Manning did when he was drafted by the Chargers and didn't want to play for them and ended up being traded to the New York Giants, my team. And so I was happy for that. But they thought of themselves, they being Dion and Shedeur, thought of themselves in that mold. Didn't turn out that way. They ended up being drafted by the team they thought might draft them at number 2, only they did it in the 5th round. And just again, for those that don't know the NFL and what this means, from the perspective of Shedeur's, he's with the same team. What difference does it make what round you're drafted? If he had been drafted with the number 2 position, number 2 pick of the draft, or any pick in the high first round, he would have gotten a contract that probably would have been, let's say around $40 million for his first 4 years. The contracts in the NFL for first round players are 4 years. The team has an option for the 5th year when they draft in the first round. So that would have been about a $40 million roughly contract or so had it gone the way they thought it would. In the 5th round, he's probably going to earn somewhere along $4 million in 4 years. So you're talking about a 35 or so $1 million differential here. And roughly, it depends on the specifics, of course, but I'm just talking in broad brushstrokes here. You're talking about a 30 plus $1 million differential in outcome here. So it was a very costly lesson, if it is a lesson, to learn for the Sanders family, and an example that will serve, hopefully, other people in the years to come. So there was that idea that maybe we were above the process, and that was probably a turnoff, but that's not the entirety of the story. There's another aspect of the story that's important to think about, and that is, what is the person's attitude? Now, Shedeur is a faithful man, young man. He's somebody who people like, so it's not a matter of somebody thinking that he's this horrible person. But there was one particular story that I think is, if there, to whatever degree there's merit to it, of course, we on the outside are only able to get hearsay, and therefore I don't know how to what degree this is the actual case. But if there is some fire to this particular smoke, then it's worth paying attention to, which is that Shedeur's attitude in the interviews leading up to the draft was less than stellar. And specifically, I heard that the Giants coach, Brian Daboll, had given him a package of about 30 plays to prepare in advance of a meeting. And Daboll was trying to kind of get a sense for how well will this prospect adopt plays? How well will he absorb the playbook? How quickly? How completely? And so he gave him a little bit of homework in advance of a meeting. And coming out of that meeting, he felt that that Shedeur had not really taken the assignment seriously and was unprepared. Now, I don't know what the story was. Did Shedeur actually prepare and he didn't have the ability to do any better? Did he just say, I don't need to do this, they're going to take me or not, and I don't want to play for them anyway, so it doesn't matter? I don't know what that variable is, but let's just suffice it to say that it's not a good look. And these things don't tend to be secret. We're talking about it. That meant somebody knew about it. And I wouldn't be that surprised if people knew about it before the draft. So people in the NFL, I mean. So it's possible that unbeknownst to the pundits and the people that are announcing the draft as it goes, that Shedeur's stock had already been very compromised. Another interesting little tidbit is the footage of the reaction of the Browns draft room when the Shedeur Sanders pick was announced. Let's put it this way: the GM and the player personnel involved in the decision didn't look overwhelmed. They didn't look super happy. They gave sort of the golf clap. Okay, yeah, great. Meaning that they probably aren't the ones that wanted to draft him, even at the bargain price in the fifth round, because here's some noise, right? You're getting. I already laid out what the quarterback room in the Browns organization is now. It's muddled, and now we have a fifth round draft pick that is a high profile with a high profile parent who is NFL royalty that's going to introduce some noise into whatever their process is. And it didn't seem like they were excited by that. Now, maybe it works out for them. Perhaps Shedeur hits training camp and blows everybody away, and they got themselves the bargain of the century where they have a top pick, a franchise quarterback for a song that they only have to pay $1 million or $2 million a year for 4 years. That would get them out of the hole they got in with Deshaun Watson. So perhaps it works out that way. And if you're a Browns fan, I'm sure that's what you're rooting for. But it's also likely that it doesn't work out that way. That there's noise, that there's problems, and it's possible that Shedeur doesn't even make the team, the opening roster of the team. That's a possibility as we speak right now. So it's a very dramatic example. And again, what can we take from this? Why would I talk about this on an Eye of Power podcast episode? Well, there's a few things. And again, when we talk about our power, we talk about the things we can and we can't control. One thing we can't control is what people say or think about us. We can control our deeds, our actions, and our attitude, our thoughts, and what we do about them. That spectrum is our vertical axis here in the Eye of Power model, action and attitude. And that does represent the knobs, I always call it, that we can actually turn, even though sometimes it's not the easiest thing to do is to turn those knobs, and our thoughts influence our actions influence our thoughts. Our thoughts are functions of stories, of beliefs that we have. And so our power, gaining power, does rely in the quality of the stories we tell ourselves. So this is true no matter who we are. And in a high profile case, like you're talking about somebody who could be earning many, many millions a year, perhaps squanders, perhaps it's taken from. Hard to say what the justice of the situation is right now without complete information. But it looks to me like there were things that the Sanders family did that did not help their cause, whether it was not preparing for the meeting with Dayball or others, whether it was acting as though it's a foregone conclusion that I'm going to go in the top handful of picks and that they're foolish not to do that, whether or not teams thought that there'd be noise from the high profile family, in this case, Deion Sanders, that introduced an element that was not welcome, or at least would cause complications that they'd prefer not to deal with, or something else. Some people speculate that it's because he's black. I personally don't think it's that, because the last two drafts had quarterbacks taken with the number one pick, and they were both black quarterbacks. So it's hard for me to see that it's that. It might be something else that's cultural there, but since most players taken throughout the NFL drafts happen to be black, and it doesn't seem to be a problem anywhere else. And it doesn't seem to be something that would stop anybody from taking the highest talent. That, if it's a factor at all, does not seem to be, to me anyway, to be one of the top ones. I think it's more the specific case. Back on that just for 1 second, some people, I think it was Stephen A. Smith, who equated this situation to that of Colin Kaepernick. Again, if you're familiar with the NFL, you know that name. If you're not, you may still know the name because it did leak into the political realm, where Kaepernick felt like, and a lot of people felt like, he was ostracized for his outgoing or very strong stances politically, where he would take a knee for the national anthem, if you remember that. And it was controversial at the time because that was not really done before that, at least not at any scale. And there was a lot of national attention there. And then Kaepernick went from being a fairly high profile quarterback to being out of the league very quickly. And so a lot of people thought that was because of his political deeds and his outspokenness, while others said, no, it's really just that he was a one trick pony, and that once he got hurt, he lost a step and he really couldn't deliver in the way that he was before. And again, not being in the field myself, not knowing, all I know is what people say. I don't know what the real circumstance is, so I'm not sure what's real and what's not there. Same thing with the Sanders situation, but it is interesting to think about because these are high profile cases and we can learn from them. So, what could Sanders learn? He speaks in a humble way. He is a devout Christian, and so he does have the language of giving it over. And as a matter of fact, to his credit, when the Browns drafted him at number 144 on the third day in the fifth round, he celebrated as though, as it looked to me, as enthusiastically as he would have if it was the number two pick that they'd taken him with. So that looked very graceful and elegant to me. And so I think there's hope for Shedeur. And perhaps all of the noise that I just talked about is just that noise. And we're going to see some great things from him. The other thing could also be true, that he wasn't really the level that the outside world thought. The people whose job it is to analyze and assess talent had a proper read that he would not really be a bona fide franchise quarterback and would struggle to even perhaps as a backup quarterback. And perhaps that's the case. Again, he was drafted in the fifth round, so that means that Cleveland, somebody on Cleveland, the owner most likely, thought that there's a very good chance that not only could he be a good backup, but that he could be something more than that. Because that's why you would take the risk of alienating your quarterback room, perhaps your coaching staff or your management staff, perhaps. Again, I don't know what's real there, but it looks like that's a potential. Perhaps you saw the movie Draft Day, and that was with Kevin Costner, and Frank Langella played the Cleveland Browns owner, and Kevin Costner was the GM. And they had an interesting dynamic there where the GM went against the coach. And it's sort of funny how this was 10 years ago, this movie, more than 10 years ago. And so it's funny how reality and fiction can sometimes mirror and play with each other in that way. So I thought that was kind of funny. If you haven't seen the movie, it's worth looking at. It's kind of fun. It's called Draft Day. Anyway, so that's one lesson in terms of being graceful, and it seems like Shedeur has done that. And if he goes into the Browns rookie camp and goes into their training camp and goes into the season and is just in a place where he's going to give his best every day and let the chips fall where they may. And if his natural talent is where it appeared that he and his father think it is, then that should rise, and they should have a really nice story there, and then ultimately get a big payday if he can deliver in his first contract. If not, if it goes a different way, well, then that's a cautionary tale for all of us. So time will tell us what the story is here. It's very interesting. Sports does give us some actually real world drama. We often say, oh, it's not the real world. It's the real world. You're talking big money, big pressure. You have to perform at extremely high level with everybody looking at you. We learn a lot from these kinds of situations. So that's why I'm thinking it's worth talking about today on the Eye of Power when we have a situation like this. At any rate, that's Shedeur Sanders' story. That's where we are in the week after the draft. It'll be interesting to see how things play out, see how things go in Cleveland and with the Sanders family. And those that passed on him, if he does end up being the star that everybody thought he was going to be, might actually question themselves if everything goes swimmingly in Cleveland along these ways. If not, well, they'll be congratulating themselves at how wise they were to go in the different direction. I'd said earlier that I'm a Giants fan. The Giants needed a quarterback. They actually traded up into the first round to get a quarterback. They didn't take Shedeur Sanders as most people thought they might. They took Jackson Dart. And Jackson Dart was played his last year at Ole Miss, the place where Eli Manning had played, perhaps has some meaningfulness with the Giants organization. But it looked like Brian Dable really wanted Jackson Dart, and they tried very hard to make sure they could go up and get him. And they were successful in doing that. And they didn't have to give up that much to get the guy that they wanted. So then that just turns out to be this is fairly standard for most teams. Were we right or were we not right about the potential of that prospect? And time will tell on that. But they're in a situation where they don't have to put even though he was taken in the first round, they don't have to put him in the game right out of the gate. It used to be in the NFL where you would draft a quarterback and you would not expect them to play as a rookie. It's more common now that first round players at quarterback do play. But in the past, that was never the case. And really, if you're looking at the ideal, the what's the play, what's the ideal path to develop a quarterback, you wouldn't put all the pressure of winning the games on them right out of the gate. You want them to get acclimated and develop in the areas that are the easiest and the or the most readily developed through them, learning from a veteran, learning in the context of a long season, what pros are really like. Before having to go out there and learn it the hard way, making all the big mistakes that cost your team dearly. That's the ideal. Not everybody has that ideal circumstance, so sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Very often it doesn't work out that way, but that's what the Giants fans and that's what the Giants, I'm sure themselves, are hoping for. And we'll see. We'll see whether or not people are going to second guess that, whether they should have taken Shedeur or whether they were genius in taking Jackson Dart. So that's the one thing that they'll, only time tells. And right now, in the aftermath of the NFL draft, there's all the Monday morning quarterbacking. There's all the analysts giving the grades, and the grades are given out based on what score sheet they had comparing to what the NFL teams actually did. And that's kind of a funny thing to do because, yes, these sideline analysts are interested in football and spend a lot of time on it. They don't have teams of people that are going to all the various sites and spending 8 hours a day for months on end, analyzing every single thing and understanding precisely what each team is looking for and values. They don't understand nearly what the actual pros that are paid very handsomely by NFL owners to get these decisions right. It's kind of a funny comparison. It's fun as a fan to sit on the sidelines and judge. But it's probably not all the wise thing. Even though it looks like it's easy, it never is. And I'll just wrap up this episode by saying that's a good takeaway is reality is always more complicated than what it looks like whenever we're first looking at whatever the issue is, whether we're evaluating talent to join our team, dynamics on our team, what's real and true about somebody, what's real and true about the situation we're in. All of these things are always more and more layers to them than what um, the powers of our perception allow us to see. And therefore, we should be in the discover and explore and question mode more often than we tend to be. Our egos like to be sure of things. We like to know for sure because it feels safer. But the truth of the matter is, even the things we know for sure are really, in general, they are stories that we're telling ourselves, and we learn to rely on those that work. And when they don't work, it doesn't feel too good for us. We enter into a stage of cognitive dissonance that we don't like, and in those circumstances, that's when we're willing to upgrade our stories. And when we're talking about developing ourselves, developing our potential, developing our teams, manifesting more of our personal power, the place where it all is the quality of our stories. So when we have a shared story like the Shedeur Sanders story, it's a great place to sort of try it on for size, put yourself in the positions of the various players, and sort of think, okay, what were they thinking? What would I be thinking? What could I apply if this is true? What could I learn from if this other thing is true? And it can give us some insights. And I hope you got some from our little exploration of that today. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with that particular player or the fate of the Cleveland Browns, but I'm sure that we all wish nothing but the best to the Sanders family and everybody else involved. So thank you for being with me this week. And if you're not a football fan, thank you for your indulgence. If you got something from this, let me know. If you are a football fan, you have opinions, perhaps opinions that go against what I was sharing with you today, I'd love to hear those too. So until next time, thank you for joining me at the Eye of Power podcast. Be well. This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com.